Morning.
Good morning. And I will start by looking to our court reporter. Are you ready for us to get started and go on the record?
Well, I'll need just a moment because I was just let into the meeting. If you can just give me a minute, please.
Sure thing.
And I'm going to change my view to speaker view because there are so many, and that way I'll only be able to see who's speaking. All right. And could you please say something really quickly so I can make sure that my audio is loud enough?
Sure thing. Good morning. And I will also say at any time today, if you need a break or you need someone to spell something or slow down, um, just let us know.
Okay, I usually ask for spellings at the end, but because there are so many different speakers, is it easier for me to just interrupt in the middle and ask for the spelling at that time, or
It may
what?
be. You're welcome to.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, one moment, please.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll go ahead and get started with our normal introductions and background. It's February 24th, 2025. I am Nicole Kinsey, presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water right application 25517X01 and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, the unassigned portion of 25517, 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority. Today is our second day of the rebuttal portion of the hearing. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom teleconference and is being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. The audio and video of the hearing are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording in the FTP folder for this proceeding. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If you're experiencing technical difficulties trying to communicate with us or accessing Zoom, please send us an email at sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov. Ms. Mullen is with us today and will be handling the screen sharing of exhibits and moving along of the slides. If you are a witness testifying today, you may simply ask Ms. Mullen to advance to the next slide when you're ready during your testimony. And cross-examiners may ask Ms. Mullen directly to please bring up a particular exhibit. We will take breaks today, as is our normal practice, and I will hold the hearing to a hard stop at 5 p.m. I am not planning on calling appearances. We'll carry those over from when we met on Friday. And in terms of procedural items, I do not have a list. You should expect a notice, I think I called it a notice of additional hearing days and assignment of hearing officer. That's to notice the start time of 9 a.m. Next week on the 4th and 5th, and then adding March 6th, and then also identifying and assigning senior hearing officer Sam Bivens to conduct those proceedings next week. And with that, I will look to the room. Ms. Mendel-Rice.
Good morning. I have a conflict this afternoon starting at about 1:30, and my colleague Sophia Amberson will be appearing for the state water contractors this afternoon should any questions arise.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Really quickly, man, was that Anderson, N as in Nancy, DER, or Amberson. A M as in
Amberson.
Mary.
Amberson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ferguson.
Good morning. I wanted to raise a logistical issue with the witnesses on the authority's third panel. Mr. Kundi has a tight schedule this morning, and so we wanted to propose to put him on first by himself and have him be subject to cross-examination, and then move on to the other two witnesses and put them on together. And then have them present their testimony and then be subject to cross-examination. So hopefully that works to break up that group like that.
That's fine with me. Let me look to the room to see, are there any objections to that approach? We would hear from Mr. Kundi first, and then the other two that were previously proposed as one panel. I think it looks like it sounds fine. So thank you, Mr. Ferguson.
Okay,
Let's
thank
plan
you.
with that. Are there any other procedural items before we pick up where we left off with panel 2? So
Yes, Hearing Officer Kenzie,
Please.
Andrew Hitchings here. I just wanted to give an update on the Sites Exhibit 335 worksheet, spreadsheet tool. We did get an updated version of that looks like it doesn't have any of the error issues that Mr. Schutz had referenced. We did send it to Mr. Schutz and Mr. Ruiz yesterday for them to take a look at, and Mr. Schutz said that it was working fine as far as he could tell. So we're planning to send that out to the service list and the AHO office at some point this morning so that everybody has it. We wanted to at least troubleshoot it with Mr. Schutz since he seemed to be the most familiar with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that update. All right, I think where we left off was with Ms. Bizzoni and Ms. Forsyth. Mr. King was asking questions of that panel, and I think, Mr. King, where we left off with you, as I recall, is we were investigating this tricky issue of the priority dates.
Correct.
And
Correct.
we had an exhibit up where we were looking at the priorities, and I don't recall what I don't think I wrote in my notes where we were, although Ms. Mullen may remember where we were because she's good at that. But you may have to call up that exhibit again if you'd like to look at it. Other than that, I hand things off to you, Mr. King.
Okay, great. Let's just start there then. So, Ms. Mullen, could you go to King 61, page 17?
And good morning to the panel. I didn't say directly. Welcome back and good morning. Here we go.
It'd be 17. There it is. If you could straighten that out. So, Ms. Forsythe, I think this is where we left off on Friday. Thank you for your time again. As you can see, this was attachment to the letter that was sent from Mr. Brown to the president of Clusa Drain Mutual Water Company. That these
I'm sorry, sir. What was a what drain?
Clusa Drain Mutual Water
Oh,
Company.
Calusa. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Saying that these rights were as of the August date.
Mr. King, you went on mute.
Okay, so that these rights were still these are priority dates after 1977 date of the state application, and that if any of these water rights protested, they would not be subordinated. Is that your understanding?
Mr. King, I'm sorry, if you could repeat the question. I think there were a couple of interruptions there that I'm not sure about the whole thing.
Was this a table exhibit from the letter from Mr. Brown to Mr. McGeegan, who's president of the Clusa Drain Mutual Water Company in August of 2023, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, so I do believe that the final table attached to the letter is actually on page 21.
Okay,
I think, sorry, I'm just comparing these two to make sure that it does look like they're the same table. So this is the table, even though it says draft on it, this is the table that was attached to the final letter from Mr. Brown to Doug McGeegan.
the terms for
Mr.
subordination.
King, Mr.
Yes.
King, I'm sorry, could I quickly get the spelling for Mr. McKeegan?
Let me see if I can find that.
It's MC capital G EOGHEGAN.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes. And in that letter, it's stated a condition for subordination, and that condition was that if a water right holder protested, they would not be subordinated. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then and it's also correct that T&M King Farms, the three water rights on this table held by T&M King Farms are not subordinated to the 1977 priority date of the state.
Objection. Assumes facts, not in evidence. We have not gotten into the scope of Mr. T&M King Farms held water rights.
Could I get a quick spelling on that name that you just said, please?
T&M King Farms.
I'm sorry. Oh, King Farms. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm thinking this through because we are, Mr. King, I think, are you going to tie this back to the
I'm tying it back to sites 411.
And we've been through some of this, we've been through this testimony before in case in chief. So I'm going to allow us to keep going on this, but let's get to the
just so we can just finish this up. So Miss Forsythe, you can see that the season start and season end dates on these. So first of all, the priority date for King, the 19931 is 1980. Is that correct?
That is what the table states.
And the priority date for 19932 and 19933 is 1982. Is that correct?
That is what the table states.
And the season start is March 1st to June 30th. That's the first part of the season start. Is that correct?
That is what the table states.
And the season start for the second part is 9/1 to 10/30. Is that correct?
That is what the table states.
Great, thank you. So you can take this down, Ms. Mullen. Thank you. So I'm just going to focus, since we eliminated the first 5 paragraphs, first 10 I'm not sure, but we're starting in sites 410, paragraph 11. And perhaps you can bring that up, sites 410, Ms. Mullen, up and go to page 5. Page at the bottom of page 5. Okay. So Miss Forsythe, so sites 411 is the agreement between Maxwell Irrigation District and the Sites Authority. Is that correct?
Ms. Forsythe, you're on mute.
Sorry, I just realized that. That is correct. The final agreement between sites and Maxwell Irrigation District is sites 411.
Okay. And the creek operation plans, you referenced the development of the creek operations plan in sites 411. Is that correct?
We do, yes.
And you also reference the strategic plan. Can you explain what the strategic plan is?
The strategic plan referenced here is the authority's strategic plan. It was adopted by the authority board. I want to say sometime in 2022. And it is included as an exhibit. Miss Mullen, if you could just scroll down, I think I've got it referenced as an exhibit. I just don't remember nope, not right there. Okay. It is included as an exhibit. I would just have to find the exhibit number.
Okay. So let's just hold off on that then, for interest time. We'll see if it's relevant. So then can we go to, Ms. Mullen, can we go to sites 411? And scroll to page 2. And paragraph 2 under agreement. So, Mr. Forsythe, in paragraph 2A of Exhibit 411, does it say, the last sentence says the site's authority agrees to allow MID's application 30445 to have priority over the site's authority, right?
That is what the paragraph says. Yes, that's what that sentence says.
And would that, and then the effect of that, was that give that priority over the T&M King 1980 and 1982?
It would
Priority
not.
dates? It would not. Okay, can you explain why not?
What this is saying is that the site's authority will allow
I'm
Maxwell
sorry,
irrigation.
ma'am, I'm sorry, could you repeat? We will leave the sites? Is that what you said at the?
No, the site's authority will allow Maxwell Irrigation District to exercise its right to divert water off of Stone Corral Creek before the authority would exercise its right in the event that there is a conflict between the two. So if there's not enough water for, in essence, both of us, or if the authority is impacting Maxwell's ability to exercise its water rights on Stone Corral Creek, the authority would bypass what is coming in from the creeks to the reservoir and allow that to continue to flow past through the reservoir and downstream.
But then doesn't that give Maxwell Irrigation District a priority right over any other over a 1970? Doesn't that in fact give the Maxwell Irrigation District a 1977 priority right?
It does not. It, in essence, says that if there is a conflict and the authority is impacting Maxwell's ability to divert, we will bypass that flow and allow them to and move that water down below the reservoir, and they can divert it if they so choose.
Okay. And then how about, so then can we move to sites 411, page 10? Put that. So there are, Ms. Forsythe, there are 4 diversion points for this priority, for this application, this permit 30445. Is that correct?
Yes, for the last location, yes. Or the last, the last application, 30445.
Then you see that point of diversion 1 is occlusive basin drain. And point of diversion 2 is Stone Corral Creek. And point of diversion 3 is Lurline Creek. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And it's occlusive basin. So then I guess let's go to the map on page, can we go to page 11? So, isn't the Lurline Creek diversion substantially below Stone Corral Creek?
Objection, vague, substantially.
Well, can you look at POD 3 and where on the map does that say POD 3 Lurline Creek lateral drain? And
I do see,
and the bottom line says AO 30445.
I do see that on the map, yes.
And why is but so that point of diversion is also given priority over the state application, isn't it?
The table on the previous page in identifying the application and the different points of diversion was intended to be a summary of Maxwell ID's water rights in general. It doesn't on that table, although it's a poor copy here because you can't see the shading. In that particular application and permit number, there's actually all 4 diversion points listed in that permit for that time frame. And there is, I don't remember the specifics offhand, but there is some maximum diversions in combination amongst all 4 of those, if I remember correctly. So Sites Authority will not be affecting flows on Loreline Creek. We simply included that in the table because it is a component of that permit. And there is, I don't remember the specifics, but there is some total diversion amount amongst all of those sources that potentially could come into play in the future.
So you don't believe the agreement with Maxwell Irrigation District harms the appropriate water rights or riparian water rights of T&M King Farms?
Objection, vague, harm, also calls for a legal conclusion.
Well,
It is vague. I don't understand where you're going with the question, Mr. King.
well, it's just
Break it
issue
down.
of immaterial harm to our water rights by actually by what I'm thinking is giving priority of a diversion point that has no connection with the creek's operation plan.
Objection, assumes facts not in evidence.
Okay, well, I'll have to work on getting the facts and evidence. And okay, all right. So where is the point? Mr. Forsythe, where is the point of diversion to? So there's 3 points of diversion here, correct? Point of diversion 1 is at the Hunter Creek. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so that just affects flows that in the Inclusive Basin drain north of Stone Corral Creek. The confluence of Stone Corral Creek and Inclusive Basin drain.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to please speak a little bit slower. The proper names that I'm not familiar with and have not heard before, I'm having a little trouble discerning them. Colusa Basin drain north of Stone Corral Creek. If you could just start from there, please.
Right. Thank you. Point of diversion 1 denoted at the Logan and Hunter Creek and Colusa Basin Drain. Is that correct, Ms. Forsythe?
That is correct. So there's 4 points of diversion shown on this map.
Yeah.
Point of diversion A, which is on the Sacramento River, and then point of diversion 1, point of diversion 2, and point of diversion 3. The only point of diversion that the site's reservoir can affect flow at of these 4 is point of diversion number 2, located on Stone Corral Creek.
But this does not give those the agreement between Max Irrigation District and Sites Reservoir Project does not give Maxwell Irrigation District effective 1977 priority to those flows on point of diversion 1, 3, and A.
Objection calls for a legal conclusion.
I think that's fair. Mr. King, I understand where you're going with this, and it is a tricky problem with the subordination of water rights. We get into a circular loop, and I understand that, and that's something we'll have to grapple with here depending on how this comes out. But it is a legal question, primarily a legal question. I mean, there's some factual, how does the plumbing work here? But I do understand your point about the.
Okay. So then let's just let's move to
Mr. King, I'm sorry, I'm going to interject just once more.
Yeah.
When someone else is speaking, I understand in normal conversation, people will interject with, yeah, okay, to indicate that they're hearing what the person is saying. But when that happens, it cuts off what she's saying because we're not in person, we're on a Zoom. So if you could just keep that in mind, please.
Thank you for reminding me. I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we go to page 4 of this exhibit, sites 410? I'm sorry, sites, not sites 410, sites 411. I apologize. Thank you. So fast. All right. So, Ms. Forsythe, I believe you cited this in your testimony, your written testimony, paragraph 5A. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And can you tell me why you cited it and why is it important for your water right?
I cited it and felt it was important because the Sites Authority will be preparing what we're calling a creeks operations plan. This would identify how we're going to measure flow coming into the reservoir from the creeks, how we're going to release that water, the timing of releases, when we would be diverting creek water to storage, when we would be just merely bypassing that water through the reservoir and releasing it downstream. In development of that plan, we have identified the need to consider our legal requirements downstream of the reservoir. And those include specifically Fish and Game Code Section 5937, and also our downstream water right holders, making sure that we are not impacting our senior downstream water right holders. So in the spirit of openness and transparency, we included in my rebuttal testimony a term that would include downstream water right holders in development of this creek operations plan, along with inputs, public review of the creek's operations plan to make sure that we were being inclusive and that downstream water right holders were able to have input into the reservoir operations early on.
Okay, and does this include area of origin concerns?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion.
Okay, what do you mean by?
Hold on, Mr. King. I was going to allow the question, so
Okay, thank you.
overrule. Ms. Forsythe, you can answer based on your knowledge.
Sure, I know how to answer that question. We have discussed county of origin considerations with Colusa County as reflected in the MOU with Colusa County. This creek operations plan would be developed in coordination with Colusa County in light of the MOU. But I'm not at this point, unless there's something specific that is required in our water right permit. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question beyond that.
Does this impact, will this ensure water flows below the Davis Weir Dam?
Objection, vague, ensure water flows.
Okay, does this protect water rights, in-stream water rights below the Davis Weir Dam?
I am not aware of in-stream water rights below the Davis Weir Dam. Mr. King, when you say in-stream water rights, I think of like minimum flow requirements for, say, fish and wildlife uses. So I'm thinking of requirements to maintain water in a channel, in a channel way, and I am not aware of in-stream flow requirements in the Colusa Basin drain in its totality.
Does the geographical scope of 5937, does it include the Colusa Basin drain in its totality?
Objection calls for a legal conclusion again.
I think that's fair. So let's move to the next question, Mr. King.
Okay. So then let's just move on then. Thank you. Let's go back to sites 410. And paragraph on page 6. Okay, so subparagraph B, can you explain subparagraph B just broadly, Ms. Forsythe?
Yeah, so subparagraph B is just simply stating our diversion criteria for the creeks. Because we have specific diversion criteria to the Sacramento River that we've had a lot of discussion on. Honestly, sometimes the creeks kind of get lost in the dialogue. So this subparagraph is intended to be a permit term in the authority's permit that would make the diversion criteria for the creeks very clear in the permit.
Great. I see footnote 6. Ms. Mullen, can you scroll down to the bottom of that page? Footnote 6, is that correct that you cite AHO 25? Is that correct, Ms. Forsythe?
That is correct.
Ms. Mullen, can we go to AHO 25, please? Is this AHO 25, Ms. Forsythe?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay, can we scroll down a little bit, Ms. Mullen? Just a little bit, just to the bottom of half of that page there. And so, Ms. Forsythe, here is where your this heading is diversions of water under the following listed water rights shall have priority or the right to divert water under this permit. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's what
And
it
it,
states.
and it lists is several water rights, including Maxwell Irrigation District, which is that AO 30445, which we just discussed. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So, Ms. Mullen, can we go to the next page? And just look at the focus on this. And it does also include a application, a permit of Princeton Cordova Glen Irrigation District, permit 21132. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
And do you know if that diversion point is north of the confluence of Stone Corral and Inclusive Basin Drain?
It has been quite a while since I've looked at these water rights. If I remember correctly, that one is on the Sacramento River. I don't, I'd have to double check. Angela, I saw you come off mute. Do you?
I can answer if that would be acceptable.
Please.
Angela, help me develop this list also. Yeah.
Yes, so these all of these water rights in this list have points of diversion on the Sacramento River, and it was in a later submittal in the letter transmitting our supplement where we added water rights that were on the Colusa Basin Drain in the table we viewed previously. So all of these are focused on the Sacramento River.
So have diversions on Colusa Basin Drain?
No, these are water rights for the Sacramento River.
Okay, can we bring up Miss Mullen? Can you bring up King 98, please? I sent that to you this morning. Okay, so Ms. Bozzoni, this is permit 21132. This is one of the rights that were subordinated. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can we scroll down a little bit, Ms. Mullen? Ms. Bozzoni, can you see it has diversion point 1A on the Sacramento River, but diversion points 2 and 3 on the Colusa Basin Drain?
Yes, I do see that.
So isn't what you just said incorrect?
I wouldn't say it's incorrect. We developed that prior list because they were located on the Sacramento River, and that is how we arrived at that list. Then we continued, as I mentioned in the supplement, to identify water rights that were downstream on the Colusa Basin Drain. So I do see that this includes points of diversion on the Colusa Basin Drain, but they would be located upstream of where the creeks flow in, which is, at least that would be my understanding. But honestly, it was included in that list in AHO 025 because of its Sacramento River point of diversion.
Yeah, that is how we also pulled in that original Maxwell Irrigation District, right? That's included in the list in AHO 25 was because of the Sacramento River diversion in that water right. And then we subsequently, so Mr. King, when you're looking at that Maxwell water right that we subordinated to, it's both the creek portion and the Sacramento River portion that we are working to subordinate to for Maxwell, in that right, because I realize you're focused on the creeks, but when in our discussions with Maxwell, it's been a bit of both.
Also, but isn't this diversion is upstream of the T&M King diversion? Isn't that correct?
Objection vague, this diversion, is it?
But the points of diversion 2 and 3 are upstream from the Davis Weir Dam. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I think I mentioned a minute ago that sites that because these are located upstream of where Funks and Stone Corral Creek flow in to the Colusa Basin drain, sites cannot affect points 2 and 3 in this water right.
But this doesn't effectively subordinate. Doesn't this doesn't effective water right date with that subordination 1977 for these diversions on the Colusa Basin drain?
No, we sites authority could not bypass or otherwise make any water available to I don't remember who we're looking at it, Princeton, at these two location points. Sites could not affect or provide any water if there was not water already or otherwise available for diversion at points 2 and 3.
And just Miss Mullen, can we just scroll down to the second page, 98.2? So Ms. Mazzoni, can you see that the diversion dates for this is November 1 to March 31? Is that correct?
Yes, I see that.
And Ms. Forsythe, do you remember that the T&M King diversions dates are March 1 to March 30, March 1 to June 30th? Is that correct?
I recall that, yes.
And so this overlaps the March 30 from March 1 to March 31 overlaps with the T&M King diversion period. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so Ms. Mullen, can we just go ahead and scroll down to 98.6, King 98.6? Ms. Mazzoni, this is, do you see this is the permit for Provident Irrigation District?
Yes, I do see that.
And it's your understanding, okay, so that's, and that's one of the permits listed on AHO 25 as for subordination, is that correct?
Yes, I believe it was.
Okay, can we scroll down a little bit? And you can see, you go down to table 2. Let's see. Again, Ms. Mazzoni lists the Colusa Basin drain as a diversion point. Is that correct? In 3?
Yes. And number 3 up here is identified as Colusa Basin drain.
Yeah. Okay. And then just go down to the next page, Ms. Mullen. And there Willow is the Willow Creek plant also well, I guess I will like it'd be too hard to establish that. So just keep on going down, Ms. Mullen. And Miss Bazzoni, you can see here the diversion period's October 1 to March 31. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what this says.
All right. And Miss Forsythe, do you remember that? Again, do you remember that the T&M diversion period is from March 1 to June 30th? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And so there would be overlap from the March 1 to March 31 period between these two permits, between this permit and the T&M King permit?
There would be overlap between the two. I believe this is the same as the previous one that Angela discussed, I should say very similar, in that we are subordinating and could affect their ability to divert off the Sacramento River. Their diversion locations on the Colusa Basin Drain, I believe, are upstream of us. Upstream of the confluence of Stone
Yes.
Corral Creek and the Colusa Basin Drain. So
Yes.
we do not view that we would be affecting their ability to divert off the Colusa Basin Drain. It is the Sacramento River that we could affect their ability to divert.
Okay. And just to finish it, the period for this one starts October 1. Is that correct?
That's what this says, yes.
And the T&M King Table Farms diversion period, the second, it also has a diversion period from September 1 to October 31st. Is that correct?
That's what I recall, yes.
And so there's an overlap in the period from October 1 to October 31st with this permit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. So then can we go back to sites for 10? Um, and go to paragraph C. So Miss Forsyth, can you describe a little bit about the intent of including paragraph C in your testimony?
I believe I had described this already when we were talking about the Maxwell Irrigation District Agreement, but the intent is really to, as we develop this creek's operations plan, to include those downstream water right holders, and provide an opportunity for their input into the development of the plan and any subsequent changes to the plan.
Okay, can we go to the next page, Ms. Mullen? And you have a footnote 7 here, is that correct, Miss Forsyth?
That is correct, yes.
And in that, if we go down the bottom, you can see the footnote 7. It says the authority is committed to development of creek operation plan to address California Fish and Game Code section 5937. Now, Miss Forsyth, do you believe the creek operations plan includes the Colusa Basin drain below the confluence of Stone Corral Creek and the Colusa Basin drain?
I believe the creek operations plan would need to look that far and consider the changes in creek flows that propagate down into the Colusa Basin drain. When you started your question, you mentioned Fish and Game Code section 5937, and whether that would extend down that far is a question that we are conducting field research on at this time.
Okay.
And
So then, okay. All right. Thank you. So perhaps we can just, Ms. Mullen, can we go to AHO 69, page 290, which is 290 and 291. Mr. Smith Forsyth, that's the page you cited, right? 69, 290, and 291?
that's correct.
Okay. And Ms. Forsyth, is this AHO 69?
It is, yes.
So Ms. Mullen, can we go to pages 290 and 291?
If you just enter in 90, it will get you there. Miss Mullen, in the page number. That doesn't.
It should have some funks. It
Oh,
should
yeah.
bottom there. Okay, great. So, Ms. Forsythe, this is what you're referring to, right? Funks Creek and Stone Corral Creek releases. Is that correct?
That is correct. And on the top of the next page is a description of the study activities that I was also referring to.
Great. But can you look at footnote on the bottom? There's a footnote 7 here. Is that correct? It's just comply with California Fish and Game Code section 5937, footnote 7.
Yeah, footnote 7 simply states the text from the California Fish and Game Code verbatim.
Right. And okay, so and that text says that the owner of any dam shall allow sufficient water at all times to pass through a fishway, or in the absence of a fishway, allow sufficient water to pass over, around, or through the dam to keep in good condition any fish that may be planted or exists below the dam. Is that a correct reading of that part of 5937, Ms. Forsythe?
That is what that sentence says, yes.
So Ms. Forsythe, are there any dams now in your understanding, are there other dams in the Coosa Basin Drain right now?
So there are structures in the Coosa Basin Drain. Ballston Weir, Davis Weir. I can't really speak to whether those are dams in the context of Fish and Game Code section 5937. I think this section of the Fish and Game Code is not something that you receive a permit or approval for. It's been mostly interpreted by the courts and others. And there's not a lot of interpretation by the courts. So exactly what a dam means in the context of 5937, I think is something that is a legal question and that isn't defined explicitly in the statute.
Right, okay. But it does say any dam in the first line, is that correct?
Objection, asked and answered.
Okay. Does it say any fish in the second line? Keep in good
Mr.
condition.
King, where are
Yeah.
we going with this? I mean, we can all read the statute
Yeah, okay.
let's
Well,
get
thank
to
you.
the factual
Okay,
question.
Ms. Mullen, can we go to King Exhibit 53?
I'm not sure we're able, so we're having a little trouble, Mr. King, because it sounds like it was submitted as an Outlook file, not a PDF. I'm not sure we're going to, maybe I'll ask my team. Mr. Anderson, I don't know if you can speak to whether we can convert it quickly to a PDF.
Let me look into that real quick.
My apologies. I'm not so technically savvy. I apologize.
It's, and this is for my team, it's King 53. Is that right, Mr. King? King 53?
Yeah, so I want to bring up King 53, 54, and 55. I believe you brought up King 54 before in previous parts. It's too early to take a break, is that correct?
Well, we may need to in this
Oh, yeah.
case. 'Cause
I
I'm
can go,
hoping,
I can just finish, we can go somewhere else. Then I have one little more part to go over, and then perhaps we can come back to this. How about that? I just
sure,
wanted to,
go ahead and do that. And we
yeah,
may need to take a break. I may actually need you to send those exhibits again. We're getting, and I'm getting the same problem. We're getting an error when we're trying to open those files.
okay, yeah. I don't know if I'll be able to convert them to PDF. Um, okay. My apologies. So then Miss For, let's go back to sites 410. And in that footnote 7, Miss Forsythe, you also referred to AHO 108. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that adds additional detail primarily to the aquatic studies to be conducted on Funks and Stone Corral Creek.
Right. And we have paid, and you reference pages 2D 49 to 55. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Ms. Mullen, can you bring up AHO 108 and go to, let Ms. Forsythe confirm that it is, and then go to pages 49 to 55 to page 49? Yeah. So, Ms. Forsythe, is this AHO 108?
This is, yes.
So, Ms. Mullen, can you go to 49, I guess? We're going down a little bit farther.
Yeah, it would be, it's actually page 51, Ms. Mullen, when you do it on the PDF.
2D 49, yeah. Thank you, Ms.
Yeah.
Forsythe.
Yep.
Okay, 2D4, go down a little bit farther, I think, releases. Yeah, there he goes. Yeah. And so, Ms. Forsythe, again, this references in the, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, to maintain fish in good condition consistent with the California Fish and Game Code, section 5937. Is that correct?
That is correct. So we've proposed a number of study activities on Funks and Stone Corral Creeks to study the creeks and understand the fishery community in those creeks. And that's what's outlined here in this appendix.
But it says just in Funks and Stone Corral Creek. Is that correct?
That is correct. So Funks and Stone Corral Creek are what we call ephemeral creeks, meaning they generally flow just in response to rainfall events. Once we once the creeks come down out of the kind of the foothills there and reach the valley floor, they're pretty substantially affected by adjacent agricultural lands and used as water conveyance and discharge systems, functionally kind of used as canals and drainage systems. So we have focused our study activities more closely to the location of the two dams, and to some extent understanding downstream a little bit to understand how far the fisheries may go below those dams. But by the time we get onto the valley floor and functionally kind of past the TC and GCID canals, the creeks are used as conveyance and drainage systems, and that the morphology of the creeks and the flow in the creeks is substantially affected by those activities.
Stone Creek
Not
doesn't.
by, sorry, not by flows coming out of the site's valley.
But doesn't the totality of the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge include Stone Corral Creek?
Objection, relevance.
She just said, Ms. Forsythe just said that there was a that Stone Corral was a thermal stream, and it was just used for agricultural purposes. The actually Stone Corral Creek run is not a thermal, and the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge, there's water year round.
Well, Mr. King, you don't get to testify here, so you can ask a question about that. Go ahead.
Okay.
I think was your question.
So doesn't Stone Corral Creek run and run through the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge?
That is my understanding is, yes, it does run through the wildlife refuge.
And do you know if the water is ephemeral in the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge or year long? Do you know?
I don't know specifically in the wildlife refuge. I will say that as the creeks pass the canals and enter onto the valley floor, because of their use as water conveyance systems and drainage systems, they may actually flow for much longer during the year in those locations. But we do see the creeks dry out typically in the mid to late spring through the summer up near the dam locations. So water that may be flowing in the creeks in the summer down at the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge is likely water that has been put into the creeks by adjacent agricultural uses or a canal to use it as a water conveyance system. So functionally up near the reservoir and in the reservoir footprint, the creeks will dry out in the summer. Even though you may have water in them much lower in the system, that water is coming from somewhere else. It's not natural drainage coming off of the hillsides.
Right. Okay. But does your study include the part of Stone Corral Creek that's included in the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge?
At this point in time, we have not proposed study locations down there because we feel that the portion of the creeks that will be affected by the reservoir is much closer to the reservoir footprint.
Okay. So then let's just finish up this part by just Ms. Mullen, can you go down to 2D 53? Let's go to 52 first. Just, I think it's 3, 4 more pages down. Okay, so can we go up a little bit, just see the subtitle for this? So Miss Forsythe, you see this flow characterization and geomorphic study, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And then if you just look at the general subheadings here, channel classification, local watershed inputs, if you just observe that, Miss Forsythe, then scroll to the next page. Just, Miss Mullen, can you just scroll to the next page then, 2D53. So, Miss Forsythe, you see subheading like channel complexity, um, channel beds, substrate. These are all just the physical conditions of a channel that impact 5937. Is that correct?
Objection, overbroad,
Okay.
lacks foundation.
So, Miss Forsythe, when you see like channel complexity, what do you believe that means?
We are looking at all of these different components because they could give indications on if there are fish in the creeks, the habitat necessary to maintain those fish in the creeks. So there's kind of two questions here that we're looking at in the studies is, are there fish? And if so, where are they located? And what type of fish are they? And then what are the habitat characteristics that may be sustaining these fish? And that's what all of these flow characterization and geomorphic studies are for, to understand potential habitat characteristics that may be sustaining fish in the creeks.
It also includes the presence or absence of gravel bar developments. Is that correct?
That is what this states. Yeah, I mean,
So if there was a gravel bar so one of the considerations of whether or not a gravel bar is restraining water for habitat, that would probably is that an issue? Do you think it'd be included in here?
in this context, usually a gravel bar may be an indicator of suitable habitat for fish spawning for maybe some of our trout.
Yeah. Where do you think the considerations of dams restricting flow would be included in these pages?
So, as I mentioned previously, 5937 is a little tricky because there is no permit or approval. It's up to the authority to, in my opinion, conduct studies and understand the creeks, use those study activities to get a sense of the potential for fish in the creeks, if they exist, where they exist, and what kind of habitat is sustaining those fish. And that's what we have proposed here in this effort is a series of studies before the project is built to create and understand, or not to create, but to understand baseline conditions in the creeks. And then duplication of those study activities after the project is built, to make sure that we're maintaining those conditions if fish exist in these creeks.
Okay, and your study or the operations includes Colusa County, isn't that correct? The operations to the creek operations committee or advisory committee includes Colusa County.
As of right now, it's just a term proposed in our water right permit, so there's not really an advisory committee per se, but in that term, we have identified working with Colusa County on development of this study plan and of the operations plan. I believe it also includes some of the fisheries agencies.
Have you considered including Cachodehi or the northeastern Pomo or Quetzaldehi, the local indigenous tribes?
We had not in the term, but we'd be more than happy to include their participation in this.
Right. So, Miss Kinsey, signing officer Kinsey, I just wanted to really see if we could go over the photos if they're available.
So my team they continue to not be able to open them files. I do recall, I mean, I don't think we had this, I think we did look at some of these
Yeah.
in your case in chief. So I'm not sure what happened, whether there's, it sounds like one possibility is that if it was submitted as an Outlook file, that those can expire in some way.
Oh.
And that's the reason we asked for PDFs, or a JPEG here would work also, because we run into these file storage problems. So what we can do is take a break. And if you have the files and are able to convert them to a PDF format or a JPEG, that might work. We can,
Try. I don't think I'll be so successful. So then if I can't, then I'll be done with my testimony.
well, let me give one. And so the other problem is that I believe we're having the same issue with a file you submitted on Friday.
Yeah. So I had a friend of mine actually help me convert that to PDF. So hopefully that one works,
Okay.
but
Okay.
yeah, so I did send that back PDF, but I don't know if I can get this to my friend to help me in the break. So I'll try
In a
10 minute,
it
whatever
looks
time.
like, and you were referencing
53, King 53, King 54, and King 55. That's it's a dam at Stone Corral Creek and it's a dam at Davis Weir, and just the impact of dams and fish, how they may relate to 5937.
let's go ahead. It's 10:13. We can go ahead and take a morning. Let's take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, I'll see if my team is able to bring those up, because I do recall we had access to them before.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I remember.
But we will, longer term, we may need to work with you to get files that will stay stable in our record. So let's go ahead. We'll take a 10-minute break and we'll come back. Yes, I'm sorry.
Kinsey, if it's helpful, I might be able to convert these to PDF here if I just have a little bit of time. I'm able to open them in an Outlook format.
I think we end up being able to do that, but when the team tried to convert it to PDF, the photos were blank.
Yeah,
So
we were able to open King 52, but it's an email and it
I'm sorry, I can't see who's speaking right now. If you could please announce yourself and then speak, please.
it's on our AHO staff. This is Mr. Anderson who's speaking. Go ahead.
So King 52 is a PDF of an email, and the email lists attachments that appear to be JPEGs, but from here we cannot open those.
Right.
So I think we're going to, take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10:25 and see where we are.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
I'll look first to the court reporter. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn to my team. Did we have success? I know you were working on it. Did we have success accessing, I think, King 53?
Yes, we have success with King 52 and 53.
Okay, and still working on 54 and 55?
Yes.
Thank you. And that was Mr. Anderson again. Um,
So my video seems to be stopped. I'm trying to get Miss Kinsey. I can't start my. Okay, here we go. Maybe this works.
there you go. You're back.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. So I also emailed them again to attachment if that worked. I don't know if
I
you
think
got that.
we did, yes. And I think we are ready. If you would like King 53,
Okay.
I believe we're ready to bring that up.
Yeah. So we need to bring up King 53, Miss Mullen. And just it's actually the next two photos. So scroll down to the next page. Um, so and just go to scroll to the yeah, and maybe it will get bigger. So Ms. Forsythe, you may recognize this or not, but this is diversion point for Maxwell Irrigation District just south of Maxwell Road. Do you recognize that?
Objection. It lacks personal knowledge, speculative, and relevance. These are also images that I believe we went over in the case in chief. It's not clear how they relate to the rebuttal testimony, whether Ms. Forsythe has any personal knowledge of these photographs or the location, and how these photographs and when they were taken reflect proposed project conditions.
Noted. Let's Mr. Well, let's start with this. Ms. Forsythe, do you recognize this location?
I will say that usually when I'm going by this location, it's about 45 to 50 miles an hour. So I think I have been by here. But I definitely have not stopped to kind of look at it and verify that this is that exact location.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So
So, Mr. King, what are you trying to establish here that isn't already, I mean, evident from the
well, I'm
photograph?
trying to establish that this looks like this is question is this any dam? And it's on that there's a structure that looks like a dam on Stone Corral Creek, right next to the Delvin National Wildlife Refuge.
And I would object on the basis that it calls for a legal conclusion and interpretation of the code.
I think that's fair. Why are you asking these questions of Ms. Forsythe, I guess is what I'm getting to. Which part of her testimony are you responding to?
To the it would be AHO 69.
It's not AHO. Her rebuttal testimony is what you're asking questions
Well,
about.
she refers to in her footnote, she refers to AHO 69, which has a site out of code 5937.
Right.
And in that it talks about the owner of any dam shall allow sufficient water at all times to pass through a fishway and to keep in good condition any fish.
Yes.
So my question is this any dam?
I think we need to move on, Mr. King. This is
Okay.
not going to be productive, not from I don't think this is a factual question from Ms. Forsythe. This sounds like a legal argument that you might want to make in your closing brief.
Okay, and then let's just bring up 54. King 54. Let's scroll down, yep. And guess so so can we make it a little bit bigger, a little bit zoom out a little bit on this? Maybe go to the next one photo. Yeah. So Miss Forsythe, do you recognize this as the Davis Weir?
Object again on the basis of relevance and personal knowledge. It's also, again, speculative of some past condition relevant to the current discussion of project conditions. There is very minimal probative value compared to the time consumption with review of these photos.
Thank you, Ms. Chester. I'll ask the same question. Ms. Forsythe, do you recognize this location?
I do recognize this as Davis Weir Dam, yes.
And then
And
Mr.
okay.
King, please be very focused in what you ask here.
Okay. And okay, so then if we could go up to the previous photo. And if you could zoom in on that sign. So Miss Forsythe, does that look like a dead fish?
Mr. King,
Captain.
I remember us doing exactly this on
Right.
Case in Chief, so let's not do it again. Thank you.
Okay, one more photo then. 55. And this will be my last set of questions. Keep on scrolling down. Just scroll down and keep on scrolling. There we go. So, Miss Forsythe, we talked about a gravel bar and how that in the AHO 108, I believe, talked about gravel bar in channels. Does this look like a gravel bar or sandbar to you?
Objection, relevance, calls for potentially a legal conclusion, again, if we're looking within the scope of the code.
Well, in reference to 5937, they mention gravel bars and channels.
So, Ms. Forsythe, the same question again. Do you recognize this location?
I do not specifically recognize this location. I mean, I recognize it generally as the Colusa Basin drain. It looks to be the Colusa Basin drain. I don't recognize this location specifically.
Ms. Forsythe, we've had several discussions about this sandbar, haven't we?
You and I have definitely had several discussions about a gravel bar, sandbar on the drain, that you've expressed concerns about, but I can't say that this is the exact one, and but we
Okay.
have had conversations about.
Okay, one last photo then. Just scroll down. Can you keep on scrolling down the next picture? So, do you recognize, does it look familiar now? Like that's at where our site visit was, where we started our site visit, entering enter the levee at Han Road, intersection of Colusa Basin Drive?
Objection again regarding relevance and the scope of Ms. Forsythe's rebuttal testimony.
And so let's start with the scope of the testimony. Mr. King, what are you responding to in Ms. Forsythe's testimony?
Her reference to 59 CD, the code 5937, and
that's too general. This is not free reign to go through everything in 5937.
okay, that's fine. Well, thank you. I'm done with my testimony, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. King. So at this point, I want to be mindful of that completes cross-examination for this panel. The AHO team has a number of questions for these witnesses, but I'm also mindful that I know you have there's a constraint on Mr. Kundi, as I understand, in terms of timing. So this is just a logistic question from me. The AHO team could hold our questions if it makes sense to go to Mr. Kundi. I don't know that it'd take more than 20 minutes, but something like that. Someone has feedback. If
Maybe you get some estimates across.
Well, I think,
there we go.
yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
think
Mr. Ferguson.
we can go through the questions now, and
Okay.
then we'll just alert Mr. Kundi when it's time to appear.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And I'm going to do my best. Once again, this is from the team, so I didn't necessarily formulate all of these. And I appreciate your patience as we go through some of these. And some of them may be, I'm going to exercise my discretion as the hearing officer. They may not exactly be within the scope of, some of them are kind of cleanup that questions we have from case in chief to some extent, although they all relate to the rebuttal testimony. The first question, and I'm just asked to both of you because I'm not sure what, feel free, either of you feel more comfortable responding. The first question relates to, I think, Ms. Bizzoni's testimony. So we don't need to go to it, but it's cites 395 and the figure 2 on page 11, which identifies the diversion season, the proposed diversion season of December through March. I don't have it in color in front of me, so I'm having some trouble.
Sorry.
Please go ahead.
The diversion season is September 1 through June 14th. It's that inner band that kind of truncates in the middle of June. That's the diversion season in this figure.
Great. And then the primary, I'm sorry, I think I was referring to the primary diversion months then are December through March. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
And then my understanding is that it is possible that there would be releases made from Sites Reservoir also in December through March. Is that correct?
I would say that that would be very limited and very rare. The diversions from the Sacramento River go through what we call the inlet outlet works, and that goes both ways. And so if we are able to divert from the Sacramento River and put that in storage, we would not be able to release at the same time. So we would only be making releases from the reservoir in those months if it was like an extremely dry winter and we had no opportunity for diversions. And one of our storage partners requested those releases at that time.
Thank you. That's very helpful. All right, the next question is on page 4, arises out of page 14, also of your testimony, Ms. Bizzoni, with respect to the exchanges. So in paragraph 29, you state that exchanges help meet project objectives by providing increased flexibility and capacity to move water across the delta. Can you explain briefly how exchanges increase the capacity to move water across the delta?
Yes, so in this sentence, project refers to sites project, just to make sure that's clear. And so downstream from Sites Reservoir, after releasing, there's a proposed pipeline called the Dunnigan Pipeline. And that currently has a design capacity of 1,000 CFS. And there may also be constraints to move water through the Colusa Basin drain. And so if we were able to exchange water before the transfer window, so this is mostly in regard to moving water south of Delta. So the transfer water begins July 1. We may be able to perform an exchange, let's say in April through June. we would release water from sites. In my example on the next page to meet like delta outflow requirements, and that would allow water to be backed into storage in Oroville or Shasta. And then that water can be released during the transfer window of July through November without the Dunnigan pipeline and potential Colusa Basin drain constraints. So we could potentially release it at a less constrained time from site's reservoir and have it be in Oroville or Shasta that don't have that Dunnigan pipeline constraint during the transfer window.
Thank you. That is also very helpful. On that, since we're talking about the exchanges and the transfers, in thinking about exactly the type of exchange that you described, does the operation of an exchange like that affect, for purposes of, I guess, accounting for water moving south of Delta, does that effectively convert the water from non-CVP water that is moving south of Delta to CVP water that would be moving south of Delta? Does that question make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
And I would say that we haven't envisioned it that way. Ms. Forsythe mentioned on Friday, had to remember what day, on Friday, that we really view, when we're talking about exchanges, this would be, local participant water that's being exchanged. So if we have exchanged one of our south of Delta participants' water into Shasta, it would be kind of earmarked for them. It would be sites water held in Shasta. It's not CVP water, and it would move during the transfer window. And same with Oroville. I believe we're envisioning that to function the same way. It's earmarked as sites water basically in Oroville and would be tagged for that specific participant.
But the water would be diverted under a CVP water right?
Yes, it would be. The exchange operation would kind of change its color within the reservoir.
So, this is all correct. And I think maybe, Ms. Kinsey, what you're getting at is, yes, it would have been diverted under a CVP water right in Shasta. It would have to be released from Shasta, consistent with the CVP water rights under their opportunities and constraints. If that water is moving to a state water project contractor south of Delta, we may need to actually work what we sometimes called a tri-party exchange, where Reclamation is releasing that water to meet, say, Delta purposes, in-basin needs and Delta purposes for DWR. And then we are moving through COA accounting. DWR is moving water to the site's participant south of Delta. The CVP place of use does not include Southern California. So there may be a few steps here in that particular scenario with Shasta, depending on who that water was exchanged with, to ultimately stay within the bounds of everybody's water right and make that exchange work. That's probably more true of if the exchange is with a state water project participant in sites. If it's a CVP participant, it becomes more straightforward out of Shasta, if that helps.
This does. No, this was very helpful. Thank you. And let's keep on this line. And I'm going to ask Ms. Mullen, can we go ahead and pull up sites 395 and go to page 20?
While she's doing that, can I step away for just like 30 seconds?
Sure.
Thank
let
you.
me know when you are ready to go back.
Okay, thank you.
And we're going to look at table 3 at the bottom. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm ready.
Great, thank you very much. So I thought we'd go to this. This is table 3. I may have a couple questions about this. One is, as you describe table 3 here, this lists a maximum combined amount of non-CVP SWP transfer water that can be moved from north of Delta to south of Delta annually. And so my question is, with an exchange that we just talked about, is it your understanding that that water would be included as non-CVP SWP transfer water, or would it be CVP water that's exported?
My understanding is it would be non-CVP or SWP water. It is not considered CVP, SWP water, and would count towards these maximums.
Even though I totally agree with Angela, and I think the distinction there is, even though it may have originated under the CVP, SWP water right, it is not going to like a CVP, SWP contractual need or their obligation. So we are viewing that as, you know, as a non-CVP, SWP water that would move through, and as though I don't want to say as though it is transfer water, but under the transfer window provisions.
So that, I'm sorry, and maybe I just missed, just to repeat for me. So it's your understanding that those types of exchanges would count towards this limitation on total maximum transfer?
Yes.
Yes.
Excuse me while I'm looking through my notes here. This long pause is me looking through notes. So with respect to table 3, do either of you have an understanding or an estimate of how much capacity there is to transfer additional water through the Delta?
Additional beyond the movement of sites water? Or
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, given existing, I mean, I don't know. Let's say if existing operations were already maxing out these limits without sites reservoir, there may not be room for sites to operate these types of exchanges, right? If it's already the case that this much water is being transferred from north to south of Delta.
This much water is not being transferred historically. I don't know off the top of my head the maximum amounts that have historically been moved. I feel like I have a number in the 300,000 ballpark in some of the recent drought conditions. But that could be wrong. But even if other transfers were occurring into the future, there would still be capacity for the movement of sites water as well.
Thank you. And then looking to, you don't need to scroll, Ms. Mullen, but let's leave this exhibit up because I might refer back to it. But on page 21, Ms. Bizzoni, you reference this, you have include a proposed permit term that would subject rediversion of water to D1641 requirements, including requirements applicable to the joint points of diversion operations. Is that accurate so far?
Yes. And this is a term that is in recent water transfer orders.
And then this question, and I am not as familiar with the JPOD rules, so I'm asking a question drafted by a colleague, so let's try to work through it. The question is Sites Authority proposing that it would be subject through this term to compliance with an approved fish plan if sites diversions bring exports up to levels comparable to SWP CVP export levels that would constitute stage 2 JPOD? Does that question make sense?
My understanding that the plans that have been required with water transfers and that we would propose for sites are the water quality response plan and the water level response plan. And I want to make sure that we're not suggesting that sites is equivalent to a JPOD operation. It's just that we understand that these plans have been found important when associated with transfers. And although I wouldn't consider sites a water transfer, we understand the similarities and believe that this term should also apply.
Thank you. All right, I think that's actually all the questions I have at this, and the team has at this point. With that, I will turn to Ms. Chester. Do you have redirect for these witnesses?
No redirect, thank you.
Thank you. Then with that, Ms. Forsyth and Ms. Bizzoni, thank you so much for joining us and spending a lot of your time with us. I appreciate it, and you are excused.
Thank you.
And then Ms. Chester, will you be introducing Mr. Kundi, who I understand is next?
No, I will turn to my colleagues.
All right.
Ms.
Mr.
Kinsey, we've asked Mr. Kundi to join, so
Great.
Please bear with us for a minute.
Let's go ahead and might as well, I know we just took a break. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll get Mr. Kundi on and I can reorganize my papers. So I'll see you back on camera at 11:02.
Okay, thank you.
And to our court reporter, are you ready for us to go back on the record?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome, Mr. Kundi. I will go ahead and administer the oath. So when you're ready, if you would please come off mute and raise your right hand. There should be a button at the bottom. I think, there we go.
Found it.
Mr. Kundi, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead, Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. The authority's next three witnesses, Mr. Kundi, Mr. Navro, and Mr. Charter, are going to address issues of agricultural need for and beneficial use of sites water, agricultural affordability of sites water, and potential alternatives to sites water. Mr. Kundi, could you please state your full name for the record?
Robert Kundi.
Do you understand that you're presenting your testimony under oath?
Yes.
And is Exhibit Cites 419 an accurate statement of your written rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
And did you prepare that rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
Is Exhibit Cites 420 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes.
And does your written testimony cite exhibits that were submitted with the rebuttal portion of this proceeding?
Yes, it does. Let's see. I believe that cites 420, 421, and 422.
Okay. And did you confirm that the exhibits that were submitted with your testimony are true and correct copies of the documents that are referenced in your testimony?
Yes.
All right. Would you please summarize your written rebuttal testimony at this time?
Thank you, and good morning. I will be referring to a couple of pages from my Cites 419 presentation for the benefit of who's ever displaying that information, but I don't need that right now. So in my written testimony and today, I rebut the testimony of Dr. Jeffrey Michael and Mr. Eli Asarian related to agricultural water management and costs and the potential for alternative water sources to sites. In his written testimony, Dr. Michael identified that he is an academic with 25 years of experience in analyzing regional economies and public policy, including 16 years in California. There is no indication he has experience managing agricultural water supplies and the costs associated therewith, nor that he is engaged in farming activity. In his written testimony, Mr. Asarian is an aquatic ecologist, hydrologist. Although he does not cite his qualifications, it's clear from his testimony.
Sir, while you're reading, if I could ask you to please read a little more slowly.
Yes.
Thank you. An aquatic ecologist, hydrologist, and then if you could pick up from there, please. Thank you.
Don't hesitate to remind me again. Although Mr. Asarian does not cite his qualifications, it is clear from his testimony in reference to 72 citations, he is familiar with academic work in agricultural water management practices and with a couple of studies on managed aquifer recharge. However, he admits on cross-examination that
I'm sorry, sir, I'm going to ask you once more because some of these terms, although I know the terms, I'm not readily familiar with them. So if I have like a second, oh yeah, that's what he said. But when you're reading quickly, I don't have a second to do that. And so therefore, I'm not catching some of these words. That's the reason I'm asking you to slow down. If you were just talking about fashion, I would get every word. But with this stuff, I need to be able to hear it very clearly.
Yes. And
water management practices. Thank you.
So Mr. Asarian admits on cross-examination that he has no experience with production agriculture or management of agricultural water supply. I offer you today the difference between an academic perspective and a real-world perspective, the difference in perspectives between those who study agricultural water management and those who practice it, as I have for 41 years. My qualifications are provided in Exhibit Cites 420 which does not need to be displayed. I graduated in 1983 from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, magna cum laude, the Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Engineering. I'm a licensed agricultural engineer in California. And from 1983 to 1987, I worked on a farm in Kern County as an irrigation engineer, where I designed, constructed, evaluated, and improved on-farm irrigation systems. I also developed cost and budget models to manage on-farm water costs in numerous irrigation districts. Since 1987 through 2018, I worked in various positions at Wheeler Ridge, Maricopa Water Storage District in Kern County. This includes 11 years as the assistant engineer manager and 8 years as engineer manager, who is a general manager with an engineering degree. Among other duties, I was responsible for acquiring, purchasing, managing, and accounting for water supplies delivered to Wheeler Ridge farmers. Wheeler Ridge was founded in 1959 to acquire and deliver an imported surface water supply from the State Water Project to lands within its boundaries and to correct groundwater overdraft. It's located at the south end of the San Joaquin Valley, near Bakersfield in Kern County, and provides irrigation water to about 78,000 acres of cropland. Another 12,000 acres of additional cropland relies primarily on groundwater, and Wheeler Ridge manages the groundwater basin underlying the total of 149,000 acres within its boundaries. So, responding to Dr. Jeffrey Michaels' testimony, in his oral testimony, he said that at a cost of $850 per acre foot for sites, that growing rice with sites water will result in water costs between $3,000 and $4,000 per acre foot. And that would exceed, per acre, not per acre foot. And that would exceed the gross revenue received from growing rice. He characterized this as a relatively simple common sense approach and stated that it seemed pretty clear to him that sites water is not affordable for its agricultural participants. How's my speed?
Good, thank you.
Thank you. So in rebuttal to that testimony, it seems pretty clear to me that Dr. Michaels' affordability argument is based on two erroneous assumptions. One, that agricultural affordability can be determined based on a single crop, in his case, rice, and that the entire crop needs would be met with only sites water. The more realistic common sense approach is to understand that sites water would be delivered in addition to lower cost supplies to permanent high value crops that are able to afford the site's water cost. Permanent crops must have water supplies even in drought years for survival and to achieve some yield. So let's look at a real world.
And to achieve
achieve some yield.
Some yield. Thank you.
Thank you. So as shown in Sites Exhibit 421, which I do not need on screen, this shows a history of Wheeler Ridge's deliveries from 2006 to 2024. And I'll be talking about the year 2021 in particular. In 2021 and 2022, the district received a 5% allocation from the State Water Project, which is its primary water supply. So obviously severe drought year. This is exactly the kind of year when sites water is most valuable because it's intended to be a primarily drought year water supply and it's most valuable for keeping permanent crops alive. So as you'll see in a moment when we pull up the first slide, Wheeler Ridge gets supplies from multiple water sources, even in dry years. And it will show that the permanent crops in Wheeler Ridge do not rely on a single water supply source, such as sites. Therefore, sites is only necessary to add an increment of water supply, including that will include water supplies from lower cost sources. So previously, Dr. Michael used $850 per acre foot as the site's water cost. For Wheeler Ridge, the water cost is actually significantly higher. Because site's water delivered into the Sacramento River must be conveyed across the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to the export pumps at the south end of the Delta. And that's where Wheeler Ridge would get its water from, then conveyed down the California Aqueduct. There are carriage water losses when water is conveyed through the Delta. And the average carriage loss in drought water years is about 25%, which means that Wheeler Ridge only gets 75% of the water that it orders released from site's reservoir. So when you do the math, water cost is escalated to about $1,140 per acre foot. So in Wheeler Ridge, farmers do have a choice. They are not obligated to buy water from the district, and we typically ladder water costs into different price categories. So if is it Ms. Mullins who is in control of the exhibits today?
Yes, indeed, she is.
Okay. So Ms. Mullins, if you would pull up Sites Exhibit 419 on page 5 and Table 1. Perfect. Thank you. So this is data, this is real data. Wheeler Ridge is required to reconcile its actual costs and water quantities every year under contract terms. And this table shows the water quantities from 2021 that the district purchased in a year when the district had a 5% state project allocation supply, which can be seen on line 16. And you can see that that supply is about 10,000 acre feet and costs nearly $2,700 per acre foot. And if you look at lines 17 through 19, you'll see that an additional tier of water supplies was made available to our farmers from 8 different sources, a total quantity of nearly 90,000 acre feet. And when you aggregate those 8 sources, meld them together, the water cost that we charged our farmers for that tier was $302 per acre foot. And then there were additional tiers shown on this page. Of particular note is when you compare the costs of 3 of these water sources, I note on line 16, $2,700 per acre foot, and line 19, over $28,000 per acre foot, as well as $2,600 per acre foot. All of those sources of supplies are higher than the site's cost of $1,140 per acre foot. But when melded together, the cost is significantly lower because we also include costs from local wells, from our groundwater banking, recharge and recovery projects, and other sources. So there's 2 key takeaways here. This is real drought year supplies, 2021. And in that year, 3 of those supplies were more expensive than site's water would. But we also meld those supplies with other supplies to produce lower cost water for our farmers. So this demonstrates that when you do an affordability analysis for site's water, you need to look at the entire portfolio, not just the site's water cost, how it's melded, what crops it's delivered to, and how those unit costs compare to the real market. So consequently, and I would note there's a table 2, which we don't need to see immediately following this table in my written testimony, which uses a similar analysis for 2022. And in 2022, district purchased 11 water sources that were more expensive than site's water because it was the second year of a drought, only a 5% state water project supply. So the conclusion from this is that when one does an affordability analysis on the site's project, you must take into account that crops will not be irrigated with water exclusively from sites, and that those costs would comprise only a portion of the total cost for this water supplies. And I believe the testimony of Mr. Navarro and Mr. Charter will reinforce this point. And secondly, that the costs for site water are actually within the affordability range in the real world market in both 2021 and 2022, and are therefore affordable for San Joaquin Valley agriculture. Moving on to the testimony that I rebut from Mr. Asarian, he notes in his very first paragraph, and I quote, "This testimony demonstrates the potential for alternate water sources for those agricultural water districts. And the first source is reducing water demand through water conservation and efficiency. The second is increasing water storage through enhancing groundwater recharge." I will rebut both of these statements. And in particular, Mr. Asarian is identifying the potential, and I emphasize his phrase, for these alternate water sources. So let's look at Wheeler Ridge in 2020 data, which is data included in the district's agricultural water management plan, available on its website, but not included within this testimony. But I do cite these numbers within my written testimony. In 2020, the district total cropland was nearly 90,000 acres, and 83,200 of those acres were permanent crops and vegetables that used low volume irrigation methods, particularly drip irrigation, buried drip irrigation, fan jets. That's over 92% of the total cropped acreage in the district, using low volume, high efficiency systems. This means that the potential that Mr. Asarian describes for water conservation and efficiency is very limited within Wheeler Ridge, because that conservation and efficiency has already been largely achieved. Mr. Asarian also, in paragraph 6, identifies that fallowing cropland and not irrigating cropland are highly reliable strategies for reducing consumptive use. My response is that it is obvious that producing food to feed people is a desirable public policy. Irrigation of food crops is an official beneficial use for State Water Resources Control Board regulations. And until public policy changes to encourage growing less food, highly reliable strategies such as fallowing or not irrigating are counterproductive to feeding people, and therefore are not acceptable alternatives to the site's project. Furthermore, in paragraph 10 of his testimony, Mr. Asarian cites a 2010 study suggesting there's substantial opportunity to reduce his, quote, unproductive consumptive use, unquote, through changes in irrigation methods. Well, Wheeler Ridge has already adopted those and has been doing so since the 1980s. As an example, in 1985, I designed and my employer installed a 160-acre buried drip irrigation system on asparagus in Wheeler Ridge. And such modernizations, which began in the 1980s, have continued to the present day, such that 92% of crops in Wheeler are now irrigated with such methods. In paragraphs 15 to 18 of his written testimony, Mr. Asarian argues that managed aquifer recharge, which he abbreviates as MAR, is an alternative to sites reservoir. He notes that Kern County has been a leader in this area for a long time. So, Ms. Mullins, if you would pull up sites 419, page 9, lines 1 through 14. Very good. And if you could scroll down just a little bit, pick up lines 15 and 16 as well. So this is a list of managed aquifer recharge projects within Kern County, taken from the Kern County Water Agency's website. There are 15 of them. And this isn't all of them. This is only some of the managed aquifer recharge projects in Kern County. And 6 of these projects have asterisks next to them. These 6 projects are projects in which Wheeler Ridge has a contractual interest. For instance, we are the second largest participant in the Kern Water Bank, which is a 20,000 acre groundwater recharge and habitat land facility. Or we have used some of these other projects for short-term water storage and recovery. I would further note that the other agricultural water district in the San Joaquin Valley participating in the sites project is Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District, which has 2 projects listed on this page. And they currently operate about 2,300 acres of recharge ponds and are developing over 700 acres more. So Wheeler Ridge and Rosedale Rio Bravo have already heavily invested in managed aquifer recharge and rely on multiple water sources to meet water demands within their districts. And despite this extensive utilization of managed aquifer recharge, both Wheeler Ridge and Rosedale are investors in the sites project. It is not a case that it's an either or, that managed aquifer recharge is an alternative to sites. We need both. So moving on, let's talk about managed aquifer recharge costs, because Mr. Asarian asserts in paragraphs 19 and 20 of his testimony that, quote, storing water with MAR is much cheaper than storing it in a surface reservoir like sites. So paragraph 19 refers to a 2023 study referenced at footnote 70 of his testimony, and it compares the water costs in that study to the site's reservoir costs. So when I reviewed that study in detail, I found that the methodology was plausible, but that the unit costs for water from MAR appeared to be too low. You know, this is a function of having 41 years of experience in agricultural water management in California, and I'm able to assess the veracity of that information. And the unit costs developed there come from a single data point provided by the Kern Water Bank Authority, of which Wheeler Ridge is a member. So I spoke with the Water Bank Authority staff about the $5,000 per acre capital cost cited in this 2023 study, and learned that it was the cost associated solely with building recharge ponds. That makes that study cost not comparable to sites. And the reason is because it doesn't include all of the costs necessary to not only recharge that water, but to make it available as a water supply for irrigation districts. Those costs would include the costs of engineering, legal services, financing, California Environmental Quality Act compliance, permitting, groundwater recovery wells, pipelines and canals to convey water into and out of the bank, the development of a habitat conservation plan to mitigate endangered species impacts, and other costs. So therefore, the construction costs identified in the study are dramatically lower than the actual cost to provide a water supply through a managed aquifer recharge project. In paragraph 20 of his testimony, Mr. Asarian cites a 2010 Pacific Institute study in support of the idea that MAR is much cheaper. And it's sufficient to say in my response that that study is 15 years old, and even assuming it was factually correct, it's grossly outdated and unsuitable for supporting the much cheaper statement. And part of the reason for that is because the sites project has changed since 2010. Changed to respond to environmental comments to reduce environmental impacts, and those changes also resulted in lower costs for the sites project. So in conclusion then, in rebuttal to Dr. Michael's testimony, my testimony demonstrates that sites water is affordable for agriculture within Wheeler Ridge when compared to current drought year water market rates. In response to Mr. Asarian, the quote potential unquote for alternative water sources from water conservation and efficiency instead of sites has already been largely realized within Wheeler Ridge and is therefore not a viable alternative to the sites project. In response to Mr. Asarian, the potential for alternative water sources through managed aquifer recharge instead of sites has already been realized by Wheeler Ridge and therefore is not a viable alternative to sites. And in response to Mr. Asarian, the statement that managed aquifer recharge is a much cheaper alternative to sites water is not supported by his citations. That concludes my oral summary of my written testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Kundi. Mr. Ferguson. It was a
That was an error.
Okay. With that, I will look to the coordinating NGO parties. Mr. Busher, do you have questions for Mr. Kundi?
Just a few. Mr. Kundi, thank you for being here today. My name is Eric Busher. I'm the managing attorney at San Francisco Baykeeper, one of the protesting parties in this proceeding, and I'll try and be as efficient with your time as I can. I want to start with paragraph 10 of your testimony, cites 419. This refers to the estimated cost per acre foot of water from sites reservoir as $850 per acre foot. And then when you add on the carriage water, up to $1,140 per acre foot for south of Delta delivery. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, which paragraph number were you referring to?
Paragraph 10.
There we go. Thank you. And as I was looking, I lost sight of your actual question. It was to confirm a number, I believe.
Yeah. So well, my question is, where does the $850 per acre foot number come from?
That was the number used by Dr. Michael in his written testimony in evaluating the affordability. And in his written testimony, I believe he pulls that information from a sites document. I don't remember which one, but that number was developed by the sites project.
Okay. Do you know when it was developed?
I believe that number refers to the project and is based upon our 2021 project cost estimate. And there are various documents in the sites project that identified that cost as, and I don't remember, it's either 3.0 or $3.9 billion total cost to generate the 850. I think it's a 3.9 billion. I'm not 100% certain that that's the reference.
Okay. Are you aware of any updated estimates of the cost, acre foot cost of water from sites project since those the 2021 cost estimate that you referred to?
The sites project is currently working on an updated cost estimate to bring those dollars to 2024 values, but that estimate has not been released.
And when you say the sites project is working on it, how do you know that?
I've served on the sites project's reservoir committee since 2016. I chair its operations and engineering work group, and that work group is involved currently in a process of assessing some of the methods used to develop the updated cost estimate. So I know that it is in progress.
Are the new methods different than the prior ones?
No, but they're more detailed. We have more information, more design information, more geotechnical information, so we have a better basis upon which to update the cost estimate.
Do you know when that is expected to be completed?
It is expected to be completed in April, although it's possible it could be delayed until May.
Do you have a rough or tentative estimate as to what the per acre foot cost of water is going to be in that update?
I do not.
Have there been any draft findings of what the acre foot cost is as part of that process?
Well, there was a report made to a public meeting of the Sites Project Authority earlier or late last year, which identified that inflation costs associated with construction of major infrastructure had increased by about 25% since 2021. And that's the same number that the Delta Conveyance Project has used in its updated cost estimate. So it would be, I presume, at least 25% increase.
From the $850 per acre foot.
Yes.
And for the south of Delta recipients like Wheeler Ridge, is it the same 25% increase from there based on the carriage water?
Yes.
If we could scroll down to the bottom or the second half of page 5, table 1, please. So Mr. Kundi, are the quantities in table 1 the actual purchased quantity for those various categories?
Yes.
Do you know what the quantity of sites water that you would expect to see in a table like this if the project was constructed would be?
So this calls for a bit of speculation. So Wheeler Ridge has based its participation on an estimate of water from the project of approximately 3,000 acre feet per year, but that's an average annual figure. Sites will deliver water primarily in drought years. And so it may be in the neighborhood of 6,000 acre feet, but that ratio is not firm. It depends on how the sites project would actually be operated and the needs in the particular years. So you must regard that as a very rough estimate.
And I appreciate that, and thank you very much. That's helpful. Is it fair to say you'd be looking at something much closer to the table 3 state water project quantity actually delivered in any given year than the table 3 supplement 1 acre foot numbers?
So I'm pondering, I'm trying to interpret your question with respect to the unit costs. Would that be a fair approach?
So I was focused on the quantity.
Oh, so if you look at line 17 and you see a total of 90,000 acre feet purchased from various sources, and the site's water would be, again, very roughly 6,000 acre feet, you can see that that comprises less than 10% of that total. So its effect on the melded cost would be included, but not significant, not dramatically affect the melded cost of 300. It might go up. It would go up some, but it wouldn't be anywhere close to 11.4.
Okay, so that I think you just answered the next question I was going to ask. Sites water belongs in the row that is identified as table 3 sup 1 if it were approved. That's how you would account for it in this table.
The answer is probably. These different supplies tend to become available at different times, which is why they're segregated. We might get supplies in April and then more of them in July. Because the sites would be a relatively reliable supply, I would anticipate it would be included within the line 17 supplemental 1 supply.
Okay, thank you. And is it contemplated for Wheeler Ridge that the supply from Sites Reservoir would replace supply from any of those other categories in the table 3 supplement 1 row? Or is it additive to those?
based on circumstances that I know today, it would be additive. But consequently, some of the supplies shown in lines 20 through 23 would likely be reduced. But also know that the total demand for water supply in Wheeler Ridge does vary year to year. So, and if you were to look at table 2, you'd see how those numbers change in a second consecutive drought year.
Correct. Thank you. If we could scroll down or go to the next page, page 6, paragraph 14B. You say the site's water costs are within the cost range for drought year purchases by Wheeler Ridge. Is that the $1,140 per acre foot that you're saying is within the range?
Yes.
And if that number were 25% higher, would that remain within the range?
Yes, if you look at lines 8 through 11, if you escalate 1140 by some factor, you see several sources listed in the sub 4 table that would still be higher than the site's water cost.
Okay. And in both, well, thank you. Can we go down to paragraph 17, please, on the following page? Do you have an estimate for the amount of fallowing that Sites Reservoir could avoid within Wheeler Ridge?
Objection assumes facts, not in evidence.
I'm thinking. Which facts about fallowing?
Yeah.
I think that's, maybe you can back up a little bit, Mr. Busher.
Okay. Mr. Kunde, I took your testimony to be on this point that strategies like fallowing cropland are not or are counterproductive to feeding people. Is that a fair assessment so far?
Yes.
Okay. Does Wheeler Ridge, any of the growers in Wheeler Ridge, fallow cropland periodically?
So most of the, I'm sorry, I'll give a little longer answer. As indicated, about 82,000 of the 90,000 acres for 2020 were permanent crops with high efficiency on-farm irrigation systems. And some of those were also vegetables that had drip systems. So permanent crops have a lifetime. And so, for example, almonds are typically understood to have a life of 25 years. So when that life becomes where it's no longer efficient to grow almonds because of reductions in yield, farmers will push out those almonds and plant another crop. So fallowing is a regular occurrence for permanent crops. And for vegetable and other crops, it may be that in drought years, well, it is the case that in drought years, some vegetable crop farmers will fallow portions of their land in order to adjust their crop to match the water supply. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it does as I understood it.
And for the 82,000 acres out of the 90,000, is that 82,000 all permanent crops as opposed to ones that could be fallowed year to year?
It's mostly permanent crops, but there are vegetable crops included in there that are on which high efficiency on-farm irrigation systems are used.
And for the other, I think it would be 8,000 acres. What sort of crops are irrigated there?
So there's a mix of crops. This was not part of my written testimony, but I'm familiar with the numbers from 2020. So it includes a mix of, for instance, potatoes and carrots, which are machine harvested and therefore not suitable for drip systems. There's a small amount of alfalfa. There's some forage crops. It's a small, I guess this would include. So anyway, it's a variety of various crop types that were not irrigated with these low volume irrigation systems.
Thank you. I want to set aside the permanent crops like the almonds that you talked about. For those other crops where fallowing year to year or season to season is at least more theoretically practical or possible, does Wheeler Ridge intend to avoid having to fallow crops through use of site's reservoir water?
The fallowing decision is a decision made by individual farmers as opposed to the irrigation district.
And if we could scroll down to page 11. Look at paragraph, what is this, 32B. You describe the $5,000 per acre foot cost figure from the study you're talking about as not including various things here. My question is, do you have a cost, a per acre foot cost, when those things are included?
Objection, Beg.
I think it's fair. I'll allow it, Mr. Kundi.
So, Mr. Busher, I hope I didn't misstate this. The written testimony says that's a $5,000 per acre cost.
You're correct. My apologies. I misstated my question, but do you have a per acre cost, total cost, including those other things? Thank you.
I do not.
Based on your experience with Wheeler Ridge and the Kern Water Bank, can you estimate the portion of the total costs of the bank that include construction costs only?
Objection, Beg.
Rephrase the question, Mr. Busher. I actually didn't follow the question. Please.
Yeah. There's a $5,000 per acre construction cost here. In terms of the overall cost of building and operating the Kern Water Bank, do you have an estimate for how much of that total cost is the $5,000 per acre construction cost?
I do not have that estimate. I would note that the water bank was developed in the 1990s and I became engineer manager in 2010. So I was not involved in the development of that project.
So you say the construction and subsequent unit costs in the study are significantly understated.
I do say that, yes.
I'm trying to get at how significant that purported understatement is. Do you have an opinion about that?
It would call for speculation on my part, which I think would be inappropriate, since I don't have ready access to data that would support that estimate.
And is there any data that you don't have ready access to that you were relying on at the time you wrote this?
No, I was simply identifying that a piece of a total cost of a project can't be used to make a comparative because it's not on an apples and apples basis.
But the magnitude of that understatement, you have no opinion about.
Objection asked and answered.
I think that's fair. I understand your point, Mr. Busher.
We can scroll down to paragraph 34, please. Mr. Kundi, can you point me to information more recent than the 2010 study that is cited in paragraph 33 that you're responding to, that demonstrates how costs of MAR have changed since 2010?
So the answer is no. I mean, I do have a general understanding of project. Well, I've worked on a number of projects. I have not been the lead engineer on a recharge project, but clearly there has been changes in costs and changes in the site's project since 2010. And if you want to compare this to the site's estimated acre foot cost, you can't do that based on 2010 data. It's 15 years old.
So I mean, I appreciate that a lot has changed since 2010. I'm just trying to understand. Let me just try that again. I hear and understand your criticism as this data is 15 years old. I'm trying to understand whether there's data more recent that you're aware of that is somehow different than the data that is 15 years old.
So as a general matter, there have been banking, recharge, and recovery projects developed since 2010. And it is reasonable to assume that there would be data available for what the cost of those projects is. But I do not have that information personally.
Okay. So is it fair to say that with respect to that 2010 study, you think it's inappropriate to use it as a basis for comparison to sites' costs, but you don't have a different comparison for what should be made in terms of figuring out whether one is cheaper than the other?
I do not have a different comparison. This is a prima facie argument on my part.
And then last, in paragraph 35, I just want to make sure your answer is the same here as it was above. When you say affordable for agriculture within Wheeler Ridge, that is the $1,140 figure?
Yes.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Kundi. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. I will look to the room. Are there others who represent any of the coordinated NGOs who have questions for Mr. Kundi?
This is Don Mooney. I just have a couple.
Please.
So
go ahead. We'll bring you up here. There we are.
Thank you. Mr. Kuhn, the questions about the fallowing of crops. Do you have an estimate for Wheeler Ridge about on average over the last 5 years? How many acres of that, say 8,000 of non-permanent crops is fallowed?
That information is available, but I did not cite it in my written testimony, and I don't have the numbers at hand. The district does keep track of that information.
Okay. But it's not something you consulted with or looked at when you were drafting your testimony?
That's correct. I relied on 2020 figures because those figures are readily available on the district's website as part of its agricultural water management plan. I wanted to have a citable source.
And the 2020 figures were, how much was fallible? Fallible?
So I cite 83,000 acres as having low volume irrigation systems out of 90,000 total. So some of the 83,000 is vegetable crops. So in theory, some of that number could be fallible. It's not a large number. It's probably in the few thousand acre range. With respect to the remaining acreage, I believe all of that acreage is not permanent crops, and therefore, in theory, could be subject to fallowing on a year-to-year basis.
I understand that, but my question was, so in 2020, you said you looked at the 2020 numbers. How many acres or what percentage of acreage was fallowed? I don't, because
I'm sorry, I don't have a specific recollection of that figure.
I'm sorry, I hit my volume button. Can you say that again?
Yes, I'm sorry, I do not have a specific recollection of that figure.
Okay. And so you couldn't tell, from that, you couldn't estimate what the change in number, what the change in following would be as a result of the site's reservoir?
Objection vague.
I'll allow the question. Go ahead, Mr. Kundi.
So there is a number of cropland that was upon which crops were not grown in 2020. I do not have that number readily available. It is capable of identification, but as to fallowing associated with a site's water supply, that would be speculative.
And why would it be speculative?
Objection argumentative. Or calls for legal conclusion too.
I'm not sure that, well, I'd like to know.
I don't think it's a legal conclusion.
Yeah, Mr. Kundi, go ahead. If you can, cabin your response if you don't understand the question.
So fallowing is not solely a function of water supply or cost. It also depends upon cost impacts from other sources to that farm. For example, do they have ongoing financing costs? Are their costs for fertilizer labor have changed? How is the revenue different because market conditions for their crop has changed? So because there are multiple factors that go into an individual farm's fallowing decision, that is the reason why I characterize a site's water impact as speculative.
Okay. And does the district keep records of the amount of acreage that is fallowed every year?
Yes.
And does the district keep records on the reasons for the fallowing? Because you said it could be water supply, it could be farm management, it could be different things. Is there any records as to determine how much is fallowed based upon water supply?
No.
So I think that's all the follow-up questions I had. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Is there anyone else from the coordinating NGO parties who has questions for Mr. Kundi? Mr. Schutz, do you have questions?
I have just a couple.
Go ahead.
Good morning, I guess it is still, Mr. Kundi. I'm Chris Schutz with
Yes,
California
barely.
Sport Fishing Protection.
Sir, Mr. Schutz, Mr.
Yes.
Schutz, I'm having a hard time hearing you. If you could speak up or move the microphone a little closer, please.
I'll try to do that.
Thank you.
I'm Chris Schutz with the
There we go.
California
Kicked in.
Sport Fishing Protection Alliance. I have just a couple of questions. You stated before in response to one of Mr. Boucher's questions that in some cases permanent crops were removed in the Wheeler Ridge area. Can you tell us in the last 5 years how many acres of such crops have been removed?
I do not have that data readily available, but in driving through the district, there are, in terms of what I can see from paved roads, there are at least a couple thousand acres of almonds that have been pushed out. I do not know the reasons for that, whether they are at the end of their life cycle or whether there might be other economic factors at play.
Thank you. You responded to Mr. Mooney about the relative proportion of permanent crops and vegetable crops. And you said something on the order of a few thousand acres in the Wheeler Ridge area were vegetable crops. Do you have a more precise number by any chance?
So the few thousand I was referring to are part of the 83,000 using low volume irrigation methods.
Understood.
That data is available, but I do not have it.
Thank you. And finally, you also mentioned the Rosedale Rio Bravo district, which is another project partner in sites, correct?
I did.
And do you have a sense, although you're not a representative of that district, do you have a sense of what the cropping patterns are in that district?
So it is only a sense. Their permanent crop footprint would be less on an overall percentage basis than Wheeler Ridge, partly because their water costs are somewhat less than Wheeler Ridge's. We are at the very southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, so we have more infrastructure and pumping costs to get the water to us. Rosedale is like in the middle of Kern County near Bakersfield. So its infrastructure costs and pumping costs are somewhat less, which would make it more favorable to field row vegetable crops. So you asked for a sense. That's the best sense I can give you, is that it's something lower than Wheeler Ridge's level of permanent crops, but I can't give you an approximation.
Thank you very much. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Is there anyone else from the coordinating NGO parties? And then do I have any representatives from the tribal parties who have questions for this witness? Then I will look to you, Mr. Reese. Do you have questions for Mr. Kundi?
Yeah, just a couple. Most of them were asked. Good afternoon, Mr. Kundi. I'm Dean Reese on behalf of the South Delta and Central Delta Water Agency parties. Just a couple of quick questions on table 2 that you were looking at earlier. Under the table 3 supply 1, I believe is where you said that sites water would probably fit within that category. Is that correct?
You're referring to those lines shown on lines 4 through 7, supplemental
Yes.
1?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, that was my characterization.
All right. And you were asked questions about how much water the district or Wheeler Ridge expected to receive from sites. And I got that answer. You said up to about 6,000 in dry years or drought years. Just what what months do you expect to receive the site's water, if you know?
So the site's project in its environmental impact report identifies the period for release of site's water to south of Delta parties as running from July 1st through November 30th, commonly referred to as the transfer window.
Okay, and it's your understanding that would be the time that the limited time when the Wheeler Ridge would receive site's water, correct?
Yes.
There's been quite a few questions about permanent crops. My question is, of the 82,000 permanent crops, was there a transition? I mean, at some point, was it initially mostly non-permanent crops and it transitioned to permanent crops?
It was a gradual transition over decades, but yes.
Okay. Do you have an estimate, say, in the last 20 years, how many acres of permanent crops have been planted?
I'm thinking. So I'll give you just a general sense. When Wheeler Ridge began deliveries of state project supplies in 1971, the district was virtually all field crops: cotton, alfalfa, wheat, because those crops, and there were limited areas for which those crops were planted because we didn't have an imported supply. So there were maybe 10,000 acres, plus or minus, of crops prior to delivery of state project supply. You can see from my testimony that total cropped acreage is now in the neighborhood of 90,000 acres. So what was initially no permanent crops has transitioned over time to somewhere between 75 and 81,000 acres of permanent crops. And that occurred, I won't say continuously or linearly, but it did occur, I will say, sort of from the beginning. The area was identified as an area suitable for citrus in its project report. That has turned out to be true. And with the development, and through 1991, the district relied solely on the state project supply. We didn't have any other sources. In 1991, we received a 0% allocation from the State Water Project, which caused the district to change its strategy with respect to supplying water. And as you can see from the tables I provided, now has a quite diverse portfolio of water supplies. And 1990s were also when the district began its investment and participation in banking, in groundwater banking projects. And those projects became mature in the mid to late 1990s, thereby providing a more reliable dry year supply. And at that time, that led to a gradual further increase in permanent crops because of that greater reliability in drought year supplies. So while I am, if I were asked to put together an analysis of that pattern, I could do so, but I can't do it off the top of my head other than the general trend I've just described.
That's fair enough. Has the district planted permanent crops since 1991 when you received a zero allocation?
Yes.
As a
And
district
by
planted?
District, it means the farmers within the district, of
Yeah, I'm
course.
sorry.
The irrigation
Exactly.
district
Thank
does
you.
not farm
Yeah.
ground.
Exactly. As has the farmers within the district planted permanent crops in the last 10 years?
Yes.
About the last 5 years?
Can't answer that without referring to actual data because I retired at the end of 2018 and I am no longer regularly present in the district, but the district collects data that could identify that number.
Fair enough. Thank you, sir. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. And do we have Ms. Meserve?
I believe so.
Ms. Meserve, do you have any questions for Mr. Kundi?
Good morning. No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will turn to Mr. King. Do you have questions for Mr. Kundi?
Hopefully have get a good lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have questions. So Mr. Ferguson, do you have any redirect for Mr. Kundi?
I do not.
Wonderful. Thank you. And with that, Mr. Kundi, thank you so much for your testimony today. I appreciate your time and your testimony, and you are excused. And
thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. I will look to the room before we break for lunch, whether there are any procedural issues we should address before we break.
Yeah. Ms. Kinsey, would it be possible to get a rough estimate of cross-examination for Mr. Navro and Mr. Charter?
Yes, that's a good idea. I'll let folks think about that but first I'll turn to Mr. King. Mr. King, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to be out of the way, have a meeting for about 1 to 2, and I may have 15 minutes of questions if I'm around, if I'm available. Thank you.
We will try to work with your availability. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then I will look to Mr. Mooney. Do you have an estimate?
Yeah, I would say 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Busher?
I only if I may have a couple follow-up questions, but I expect Mr. Mooney will cover the issues that I would ask.
Great. And Mr. Reese?
I may have a follow-up question or two based on something that I hear, but I don't have any specific time requested at this point.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Meserve, did you want to chime in?
Same here. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has a significant, more than a few minutes, questions anticipated for the remaining 2 witnesses on this topic? So it sounds like we'll move along pretty quick. So I think, and my understanding is then we'll have panel 4 next. We're still moving in numerical order. So, okay, great. Mr. King, did you have another question or is that a residual hand?
I don't want to hold up the proceedings. So if I'm not available, just go ahead and close out the panel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, are there any other matters we should address before lunch? It's 12:11. Let's go ahead and break until 1 o'clock, and you will need to reconnect to the Zoom as usual, and I will see you at 1.
Thank you.